Hi there, my name is David McCalden. I'm the Director of Truth Missions. If you'd like to get in touch with us, our address is Post Office Box 3849, Manhattan Beach, California 90266, USA. Right now I'm sitting in the Truth Missions video and audio studios making this introduction for you. The tape which you're about to see was filmed with this self-same camera on our very first excursion with this new Magnavox camcorder when I went to Victoria in British Columbia in Western Canada on Thursday the 14th of November 1985. The purpose of my visit there was to lend moral and physical support to my very good friend and fellow free speech campaigner, Doug Christie, who is a solicitor and barrister in British Columbia. Doug Christie, you may know, was the defense lawyer in the trial of Ernst Zundel in Toronto early in 1985, and he was also the defense lawyer in the trial of Jim Keegstra in the summer of 1985. Both of those trials were very, very important for anyone who was concerned about human rights and free speech, and so I took it upon myself to campaign for the free speech and the human rights of those two defendants with my Commonwealth International campaign against Canadian show trials. And as a result of that campaign, I travelled 4 times to Toronto and twice to Alberta, and now this once to British Columbia, in order to express the solidarity of the revisionists and the free speech advocates here in California. Now, if I hadn't gone to Victoria, to this free speech forum, then I'm afraid that the event would probably have passed into obscurity, because there was no one else there to film the proceedings or even to record the sound of the proceedings. However, I went there after I read about the upcoming event in the newsletter of Kelty Zubko, who is Doug Christie's paralegal assistant and personal companion. In her newsletter, she expressed some concerns about physical safety and security at the free speech forum that was coming up, and so as soon as I read that in her newsletter, I immediately called my travel agent and booked a flight up to Victoria. Now, it so happened that I did have a free ticket as far as Seattle, because I belong to one of these other airlines' frequent flyer programs. But from Seattle, I had to ride in a very rickety kind of airplane from Seattle over to Victoria on Vancouver Island. And believe me, that was my first experience in a small plane. It was a de Havilland Otter. And it was quite a hair-raising experience, because in those small planes, which only hold 8 or 10 passengers, it's quite an experience, because you feel every bump in the road, as it were, or every cloud in the sky. Anyway, the introduction to the videotape was filmed in the airplane as we were crossing over the channel from Seattle Airport over to Victoria on Vancouver Island. And I think you'll get some idea of what it was like riding in such a small plane. By the way, although my videotape begins with descent out of the clouds, the similarity between my film and Triumph of the Will, made by Ms. Lina Riefenstahl several decades ago, the similarity is purely coincidental. Now, one further technical point before we get into the movie. I'd like to tell you that the open forum, the free speech forum, was being put on by an arts magazine called Monday Magazine, or is it Monday Newspaper, something like that. And the owner of the paper is Jewish, and he's very artsy-fartsy and wants to make everything very atmospheric. So, unfortunately, the person organizing the meeting decided to turn down the lights and only have backlighting during Doug Christie's main opening remarks. Consequently, the lighting was so difficult that for some of the videotape, Doug Christie only appears as a silhouette with the backlighting behind him, giving him a kind of ghostly effect. However, after he finished his main speech, then the lights were turned back up, and there's a much better image for the rest of the tape. Now, one second point, I'm afraid that, as I said, this was my first excursion with the Truth Mission's camcorder, video camera, and I'm afraid that I did underestimate the lifetime of the battery, the rechargeable battery, which comes with the camera, and consequently the batteries expired about 75% of the way through the proceedings. However, we did capture most of the event for posterity, and the questions which followed the shutting off of the camera were in any case somewhat repetitive and uninteresting, and had already been dealt with previously. So anyway, we'll move into the film now, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. Afterwards I'll come back and make some brief closing remarks. So let's go over now to the videotape and let's see what you think. This is the view from the airplane crossing over from Seattle to Victoria.
I should mention, by the way, that after this evening's talk, the lights will be turned back on, and you're welcome to spend time here looking at the exhibition on the wall, which is the present exhibit at the open space. It's called Women in This Decade. It was prepared through the Women's Office Ministry of Labour of the province of BC, and it's the work of women photographers of British Columbia. This is the third in the Monday Nights at Open Space series. For those of you who may have missed the first two, a reading by Scottish novelist Alistair Gray and a performance by Edom, a Vancouver experimental dance group, and who may want to be sure not to miss future events. All will be promoted well in advance in the mailings to members of the Open Space and in conspicuous ads in Monday Magazine. You may look forward to a forum about street prostitution, which is scheduled for Wednesday, November 27th at 8 p.m. with free admission. Also, a fashion show as art, which is likely to become a dance for the audience and the models, and that's on Thursday and Friday, December 12th and 13th at 8 p.m. The admission price is yet to be determined. Also, in the new year, as they are confirmed, we hope to give you details about speaking evenings with René Lévesque, former leader of the Parti Québécois, I.P. Sharp, who is a global information innovator, and Jane Jacobs, author and extraordinary urban economist, who has profound thoughts about why cities grow and decline. Performance and entertainment evenings may include a dance party, which will be DJ'd by Monday cartoonist Linda Barry, an evening of dance with Constantine Darling, and a reading by novelist Tom Robbins. Other evenings, as yet undetermined, will no doubt be added to this series. I'd like to mention, as a side note at this point, that Jeannie informs me that the open space donation box, clear plastic about the top of the stairs, has been hastily repaired. Most evenings and events and exhibitions at the open space are free. Her thought is, give heedlessly. Regarding this evening, some particular introduction may be useful. To begin, perhaps with an anecdote, a number of weeks ago I spoke with someone in the CBC TV programming department in Vancouver. And I was inviting the CBC to cover this evening, which I thought would be of interest. And the programmer's response was, aren't Monday and the open space kind of iconoclastic? Why would you want to be sponsoring Doug Christie? Given the fact that Doug Christie might be described, however grudgingly, as iconoclastic, I probably should have answered the question. But I did catch the programmer's drift. The open space and Monday describe these events as great public evenings at the cutting edge of art and thought. We as sponsors, as impresarios, do not make a judgment about Doug Christie, about Alistair Gray's writing, about Edom's dance message. Our responsibility is to create settings for interaction, and more personally, to make sure that we are not adding to inertia, but rather to cultural vitality, to aliveness. In other words, our purpose is to make history, a conscious moment in the human record. There are three parties to such history: us as catalysts, the speaker or performer, and you, the audience. Our particular moral investment in this evening's event, a consideration of freedom of expression, is this. The open space belongs to a network of Canadian art spaces and galleries, some of whose members have had to deal with the confiscation of creative work and with prosecutions under the criminal code. Monday has, at great expense to itself, had to listen to a judge tell us, in effect, that it simply won't do for the media to call politicians liars. They shouldn't have to put up with that sort of thing, we were informed. Consequently, we, the Open Space and Monday, are both institutions with a strong personal interest in the continuing discussion and debate over freedom of expression and, by extension, issues of censorship. We know this will take 100 different forms around 100 different issues. Our point is that in regard to this freedom, we take nothing for granted. We assume that we re-earn our rights every day with every act. So the debate and the often painful and difficult issues that this debate raises goes on. One certain characteristic of the cutting edge is heat and light and conflict. This evening, I don't doubt, will produce its share. Doug Christie, a Victoria lawyer, was, as many of you know, defense counsel for both James Keenstra and Ernest Zundo. While he's kindly provided me with a few summary thoughts, I think it easiest for him to speak for himself. He will talk for a half an hour, perhaps a little bit more than that, and then respond to questions and comments from you. Doug Christie.
Don't worry, I'm not going to refer to all of it. Some of the things I'm going to say. Let me begin with an expression of gratitude. I'm grateful for open space. I'm grateful for the efforts of Monday Magazine and Jean and Jeannie. I'm also grateful for you, for no matter what you may think of me or what I may say, you're here to listen, and I'm here to listen. And in this process, for the first time, many of you will be able to talk to me rather than about me, and likewise for me. And if anything exists in the way of hope for human growth, development, communication, or peace in the world, it surely must be that you and I, without fear, without malice, can come to a place like this and discuss ideas, hopefully respecting each other's differences and respecting each other's views, right or wrong though they may be. And in this regard, I think that the hope that exists is the respect that we will show in this room to each other's views. And also for me, the hope is that you have come here, in spite of everything that might have been said about me, to hear what I have to say about an issue that, whatever I might be, is of interest to all of us, which is freedom of speech. It's such a vast topic, and there are so many things happening that many people don't know about, and I happen to know some of the things that might interest you in this regard, that I could talk for hours, and I only can promise you that I won't. But I'd like to touch on a few things that are actually happening today that you should know about, and maybe I can hear from you what you think about those things when I'm through, and any questions you might have. First of all, I'd like to point out to you that there's a great debate raging, although you'd never know it, in some of the intellectual kinds of publications that lawyers write in, and one of them is the Saskatchewan Law Review, which in volume 49 was discussing the whole subject of hate propaganda and the issue of whether we should tolerate the proliferation of the views of the accused person publicly during their trial. That's a profound and frightening thought, that even the idea of preventing an accused from expressing himself publicly when he testifies is currently an acceptable, almost official view. This is quite a well-recognized legal publication. Not the biggest, but it's not the smallest. In this publication is a sentence which, when I read it, hit me very hard. It showed me something that I didn't think I would ever see. It's this. It was basically an article by a lawyer, or hope lawyer to be, by the name of Alan R. Regel, published Hate Propaganda, A Reason to Limit Freedom of Speech. And he was concerning himself with the issue that the hate-monger can actually communicate his views during his trial, and that's an unfortunate byproduct of permitting the accused the right to speak at his trial. This, from a reputable lawyer in a reputable law journal, concerns me. But he says this: don't worry, in effect, about the possibility that the accused could communicate his views. Here's the answer. This argument, the argument that putting these people on trial gives them a chance to communicate their views, fails for several reasons. Assuming that prosecution may be perceived as a benefit by the hate-monger, insofar as it would provide the opportunity to propagate its perverted ideas further. Let me pause for a moment and point out something in this sense, which is inherent and implicit and wrong. First of all, the accused has already been convicted and he is called a hate-monger. But in our law, if it be rape, murder, assault, or anything else, you're innocent until proven guilty. But in this article, the hate-monger is already guilty, though he has not had his trial, and we're concerning ourselves with the issue of what dangers might arise from that trial. Notice that. He goes on to say, the effect of this perceived benefit could be reduced by conducting such trials in camera. Yes, I looked at it, and I looked at it again. The effect of this perceived benefit could be reduced by conducting such trials in camera. Now, everything about me as a lawyer, as a human being, says that's wrong. But nobody that I'm aware of in any official sense has criticized this developing trend of thought. Not necessarily forbidden it. God forbid that any view should be forbidden as far as I'm concerned. But no one has criticized this point of view. I stand before you simply to say that this is a very dangerous attitude towards, firstly, the issue of freedom of speech and the issue of the rights of an accused person before their trial. This I could speak about at greater length, but I won't, because there's a lot of other things that are perhaps even greater concern. Recently, a decision was reported in a local newspaper from the highest court in Canada on the issue of pornography. And although I'm not concerned primarily about that issue, the remarks made again struck me with an overwhelming sense of the danger of public apathy to these ideas, to the idea of censorship, to the idea of state-licensed freedom, which is really the essence of what I'm speaking about tonight. In a judgment regarding pornography, Mr. Justice Dixon, Chief Justice of Canada, said, now this is beautiful, convoluted legalese in my opinion, but I'll quote it as exactly as I can, and then I'll explain what I think it means. He said, what matters is not what Canadians think is right for themselves to see. What matters is what Canadians would not abide other Canadians seeing, because it would be beyond the contemporary Canadian standard of tolerance to allow them to see it. Isn't that great? Let's hear it for the Chief Justice. This is supposed to be the guiding light for the average citizen to know what they ought and ought not to see. But let me explain the real danger in this sentence, which is, two sentences, excuse me. The real danger, in my opinion, is that the Canadians he speaks about are not you and me. They are not even the members of Parliament, because they don't define this obscenity, judges do. And thirdly, it is really, in my understanding of this sentence, judges who are the Canadians who will make the decision about what other Canadians should not be allowed to see. In my understanding of recent history, politically, we had a dictatorship of Parliament before we had the new Charter of Rights, I suppose. Now, in this type of interpretation, we are capable of creating, and I suggest on the verge of creating, a dictatorship of the judiciary. And I don't know whether I would prefer a dictatorship of Parliament or a dictatorship of the judiciary. I would prefer an informed electorate, a public awareness that freedom in expression of thought, of perception of art, and of other things that do not directly threaten the safety of my neighbor ought not to be legislated against. I've got one friend, see? But it concerns me that the vast majority of people, Canadians, will sit there and say, nothing. Absolutely nothing. When people go to jail for their opinions, a vast majority will remain totally and utterly silent. That makes me very angry. I would be angry if Gary Bannerman was forced to defend himself before a criminal court for saying something that I might not agree with. I am angry that James Keegstra was forced to defend himself against an accusation that arose between 1978 and 1982, 4 years. Can you tell me what you said between 1978 and 1982? Well, tell me how any man could defend himself against such an accusation, and you then might begin to perceive the predicament of an accused after he has been maligned all over the country, in every newspaper, and everyone thinks he is so horrible that no one ought even to defend him. And yet, in a free society, he has not yet been tried. That concerns me and angers me, that people don't realize what's really at stake. And it's just as important for you, sir, as it is for me, and I don't think anybody can afford to snicker at it. If freedom is not a passionate concern to you and me, it will not be a concern to anybody else. That's what concerns me. Franklin Roosevelt said, "People die, but books never die. No man and no force can put thought in a concentration camp forever. No man and no force can take from the world the books that embody men's eternal fight against tyranny of every kind. In this war, we know books are weapons, and it is a part of your dedication to make them weapons for man's freedom." 1941. Great words. Great words. This is the Canadian official list of banned books. See? There it is. You should write your member of parliament and get one. And check and see if any of your books are on it. And maybe, like good Canadians, we should turn ourselves in. Report ourselves. Have any of you got a book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy? Anybody?
Right on.
You're all in trouble now because it's right on this list. Why, in the name of every veteran who fought for alleged freedom, should this list exist? Why should every Canadian be apathetic, ignorant, or oblivious of its existence? Why should you and I tonight not begin to work against the creation of state-approved lists of acceptable books and unacceptable books? I don't care whether you like what I believe or not, and maybe you don't even know. Probably you don't. But what difference does it make if we are not free to find out for ourselves what we believe? It's against the law to promote hatred in Canada. Sounds like a great idea, I suppose, until you begin to wonder what hatred is and who's allowed to promote it and what does it mean and a few other questions like that. This book, The Legends of Our Time by Elie Wiesel, has a sentence in it which, you know, I mean, if we're going to be prohibiting the promotion of hatred, maybe we should look at this sentence. I'm going to read it to you from page 177. Appointment with Hate. This book can be found in most bookstores. The sentence says, every Jew, somewhere in his being, should set apart a zone of hate. Healthy, virile hate. For what the German personifies, and what persists in the German. To do otherwise would be a betrayal of the dead. Well, what should we do about that? Are we fair or are we not? Of all, in my opinion, of all the miserable, unprofitable, inglorious wars in the history of the world, the war against words is the most ridiculous. Because whether you like my words or not, if I believe them, true or false, I will be prepared to die for them. And throughout history, many people have done so. And throughout history, the majority of them in time have been vindicated. and the times in which they were persecuted have later been looked upon with the due contempt they deserve. And this time, our time, is the one in which more opinions are being persecuted than any time in this country's or my life's history. I have a book that I can tell you exists in the library. Mind War, Book Censorship in English Canada. I recommend it. Really all it is an accumulation of all the reports in all the newspapers about censorship in Canada. And it is not a new subject by any means. But the reason it persists as a real problem for everyone, left, right, center, whatever their political views, is that nobody has ever really come out to do anything about it, because the guy that was being censored was always the unpopular fellow. And it's so much easier to agree with censorship when the guy who's being censored is a bad guy. And I have never found one yet who disagreed with me, of course, who wasn't. Have you? It's typical of human nature to believe that we have all the answers. But I would like to point out something that I greatly admired in a writer who recently wrote. This is a column by Barbara Meal of the 18th or 15th of April 1985, where she made a point. This, to all who think that censorship is not an issue of any great import, this is the best indication of the dangers of tolerating the kind of censorship which is going on. She wrote, Adolf Hitler himself made reference to the attempt to save freedom of speech by limiting it. You know, that's quite an argument. And I expect someone tonight will challenge what I have to say with the argument, but we must limit freedom of speech in order to protect, you know, this protection in the sense of somebody else protecting me and you, and we can't protect each other or ourselves, protecting us from intemperate remarks. He said on March the 23rd, 1933, as Chancellor of Germany, he spoke in the Reichstag with the presentation of a new law designed to end constitutional law in Germany. In response, the Social Democratic Party Chairman Otto Welles made a passionate plea for democracy. He acknowledged that the March 5th elections had given Hitler the right to govern, but in pleading for the role of opposition parties, Welles suggested that a little criticism would play a salutary part in government. Hitler replied with a speech beginning with a line from the great German poet Schiller. Hitler said, "Late you come, but still you come." You talk about persecution. During the time when we were in the opposition, in those days our press was forbidden, and again forbidden. Our meetings were forbidden, and we were forbidden to speak, and I was forbidden to speak for years on end. And now you say criticism is salutary. The law passed, needless to say. And the arguments about the prevention of the rise of bad ideas by outlawing them surely should note that the very ideas that were attempted to be censored eventually used those laws against the people who originated those laws. My main concern in trying to point out the dangers of censorship is not just related to 1933. I only had to open the newspaper today, a newspaper today, unnamed, not Monday unfortunately, but in it was an article about a senior Zimbabwean cabinet minister who warned former leader Ian Smith on Tuesday the black government might crack down on him if he continues making derogatory statements about the country. Why not? You see, if you can place the public interest above the interest in freedom of speech, why not prohibit those who are not speaking in the interests of the country defined by the political leaders of the day? Why not? It wasn't long ago before that Tom Waterland, the Minister of Forestry in British Columbia, said that incorrect media reports were hurting our foreign lumber sales. Well, of course, if we have a vested interest in the economy, maybe we should prohibit these incorrect media reports. It doesn't take long in an economic situation where people are suffering from lack of work, as we are in this province and other places, that people might begin to think freedom of speech is just not working to our advantage, and those with bad ideas who aren't really helping our economy to grow should be silenced. And I don't think that there'd be too many difficulties found in finding people to agree with that. Mr. Waterland hasn't gone that far, but he is pointing out that incorrect, according to him, media reports are doing a lot of harm. Mr. Mulroney might have thought that the controversy about sun-kissed tuna would have adverse effects on the New Brunswick economy. And if I was Prime Minister and felt that way, why, I bet I could justify silencing all debate on that too, because it's not in the public interest, which in many cases with some people ends up being their interest. How much further do we have to go before politicians can convince people, through a very, actually I think, cooperative media, that the public interest in the benefit of the economy demands that the media be correct and that the politicians decide who is and who isn't correct? I want to point out a fundamental problem that exists here. You see, I maintain the only bastion of liberty is you and me and nobody else. If we don't understand it, if we don't cherish it enough to be ready to speak out for it, it won't exist. But if there is some other protection, some people think it's the Constitution, and I kind of agree. But let me point out to you that the Canadian Constitution limits freedom of speech in the words that are the preamble of the Constitution would say, subject to such reasonable limits as are ordinarily acceptable in a free and democratic society. Do you know who answers and defines and categorizes every law under those terms? Do you think it's a jury? Do you think it's Parliament? Do you think it's me? Do you think it's you? Do you think it's a lawyer? No, it's not. It's a judge. Again, the judge will say, what are the reasonable limits of a free and democratic society? The judge will say, as he says in many, many cases. And I'm not so sure that I think judges should be entrusted with that much power. In the Soviet Union, the Constitution is endowed with all the freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of everything that we have, subject to such reasonable limits as are necessary for the promotion of a socialist state. Again, what's the difference? I point out to you that the basic difference between these two constitutions, the Soviet Union and Canada, and the constitution of that dreaded, horrible, awful United States of America is this. The American Constitution says, Congress shall pass no law. The Constitution of the United States is a limit not on people, but on the government. And if there is any protection, it is a limit on the power of government to interfere in the thoughts, the minds, the expressions of the citizen that I personally would like to see you and I begin to work for. I said in the Zundel case and in the Keegstra case and anywhere I can that error needs the support of government. Truth stands on its own. And the only thing that anybody in an argument needs, you, me, or anybody else, to protect their point of view is the freedom to express it, and the only thing that truth needs to prevail is a free and open marketplace of ideas where the combatants, with their reasons, with their arguments, with their tracts, pamphlets, books, and other material can present to the average human being what they consider right. And if Lord Randolph Churchill is correct when he said, properly informed, trust the people, then I don't think we have anything to fear in such a society. I think I have the most dangerous piece of paper I have ever seen in my life in my hands, right here. That can get a human being in this country, there it is, I'd be glad to show it to anybody, 15 months in jail for publishing that. 15 months in jail for that piece of paper, not sold, not distributed to school children, given without charge to the following types of people: ministers of the gospel and other denominations, members of parliament, members of the RCMP, distributed free by the publisher in about 600 copies. Got him 15 months in prison in this country. I am ashamed to say that nobody in the academic world, nobody in public life dares to say very loudly that that is totally morally unacceptable in a free society. I say it here tonight. We trumpet great phrases in our constitutions that I say are meaningless. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which this country is such a pious signatory, says, Article 19, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. What's the frontier in Canada? Getting past the local prosecutor's office? What does that mean? In my opinion, it doesn't mean very much. The law of our land, if it means anything in value to me, means that we should not prosecute people for their opinions. And I say there must be laws against the incitement of violence where there is a clear danger that it could result. But that's the last limit I would place on freedom of speech. That's the test that is established by Mr. Justice Holmes in the United States Supreme Court in the case of Shanks. It makes sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me to begin trying people for publishing books, for expressing ideas, and I really suggest to you it doesn't make a great deal of difference where they're expressed, whether they're expressed in a classroom, and I've had classroom teachers tell me things that were their personal opinions that I don't agree with, but I think it's their right to express them, even in school, and I know very well they do. What it really boils down to is a selective perception. There are a certain category of acceptable views, and then there are a certain category that are unacceptable views. And who decides? Well, we never vote on them. There's no list of them. And it's almost like the list of banned books. I'll tell you, if you want to get a copy of the list of banned books, you can get it. But if you want to get the opinion that was the basis, and it comes from one source, one mind, one human being decides if a book is legally admissible or not, you will never in your life, no matter how hard you try, be able to find out from your government who the one mind is. I have tried. It is secret information. The Information Commissioner tells me that it's solicitor-client privilege. So I said, who is the solicitor? Well, it's the Department of Justice. I said, well, they're not your lawyer. They're your government, the same as you, Department of Finance. What's the difference? Oh, well, they're the solicitor because they're a separate department. So then I said, all right, you got me there. You call them a solicitor. How can I argue? You're the law, right? But if Department of Justice is the solicitor and the Department of Finance is the client, the privilege belongs not to the solicitor. Excuse me, it does belong to the client. But the solicitor is bound with the privilege. So I'm not asking the Department of Justice to tell me who gave you that opinion and what is the opinion. I'm asking you, the Department of Finance, and you are the client. So you don't have any right to say, I refuse to answer, although your lawyer, the Department of Justice, might. And they said in a letter, which I have, you are legally correct, but the department takes another view. You can win the legal argument, but you never get your answer.
And I tell you, who cares? I want to know something. I want to know who bans the book and why. That's what I want to know. And I'll bet you if they had to answer those two questions, they would be perceived to be the ignorant, arrogant, stupid, bigoted, half-wit bureaucrats that they really are. But they probably perceive that problem for themselves, and they won't answer you. They won't tell you. So, it's an impossibility to find out why, and it's a possibility to find out how, and it's an impossibility to find out who. George Orwell wrote a book about Big Brother, and Big Brother is here. Big Brother supervises every prosecution, and I'll tell you another thing. He also knows the background of every potential juror that ever stands up in a courtroom to be challenged by the defense preemptorily. The defense counsel can know nothing about that juror, zero. But the prosecutor has the list of every time that juror has come in contact with the law. And if he sees a list of information that indicates that juror has had a few run-ins, might not like the law, he says, stand aside. He can say that as many times as he likes. And the defense can say, for example, 3 times challenge without knowing a thing about that person. That's the fair play we have. That's the power of the state, which not many people really know. But lawyers don't get a chance to talk about it because they're not in Parliament. They're not allowed to argue, this isn't right. That is the law. And then, of course, if you're not charged, why should you care, right? If you're not in the accused box, what does it matter to you? Right? Well, it gets me so angry sometimes. I almost wish that every decent, ordinary citizen someday could stand in that prisoner's dock and realize what the law really does. All that is really required for truth to prevail is that all opinions be freely expressed, subjected to scrutiny, discussion, analysis, debate, criticism in an open forum like this. I don't think there was really much sense to the First or Second World War unless it means that we are somehow supposed to be more free than we would have been otherwise. I happen to know, because I called a witness in the Zundel case who was in Germany during the war. During the war, he got up, he was a disabled soldier, and he was in a pub, and he sang a song that said, in effect, down with Hitler, down with the party, the war will soon be over. And I don't know the words, but it was quite funny. And he told me this, he was joking. He thought it was a big joke, because here he was in wartime, criticizing the government, and he went to jail for 3 days. In 1979, he wrote a book about his experiences during the war. He was seized, his book was destroyed, and he was incarcerated for 18 months. What improvement do I, as an ordinary human being, logically draw in terms of freedom of speech from that? Publishing a book in free society, in peacetime, gets you 18 months. But singing against the public government of the day in wartime gets you 3 days. I wonder about this society. I wonder whether we are really as free as we think we are. I'm going to conclude very soon on this note. Lech Walesa is about to be tried, I believe, in Poland. His crime is slander of the Polish government, because he said that not as many people turned out for the election as the government says did turn out. He's going to be charged with defaming the Polish state or something of that nature. One of the things that stuck in my mind when you catch a few little things that really probably are correct in the media. The maximum penalty was 2 years. 2 years. Interesting. That's the same maximum penalty that was imposed or possible in the Zundel case and the Keekster case. And I really wonder how free we are today. On the mail that I received from somebody, they had to prepare a declaration saying that nothing within the envelope contained any hate literature. So not only do you have to assess the law, you must apply it to yourself and report yourself if you happen to be wrong, if you think you're wrong. How will you know if the source of the opinion that rules your book illegal is unavailable? Well, those are the conundrums, the problems of 1984. They are the problems of a police state in which we are living today. It is not one that is as vicious as some have been, but it is growing daily by the apathy, the ignorance, the indifference of the vast majority of people. I hope that something I have done tonight or said tonight will trigger in you a desire not to be apathetic, ignorant, or complacent. And if you don't like what somebody says, remember that they might not like what you say. And therefore we must remember that freedom of speech is the basis upon which every human growth and communication has ever occurred. And the world would be a sadder place without Mahatma Gandhi, who was in prison for his opinions, Martin Luther, who was in prison for his opinions, Socrates, who was killed for his opinions, Joan of Arc, who was burned at the stake for her opinions, Copernicus, Solzhenitsyn, who was in prison for his opinions. I could go on, I could go on, I could go on. But let us bear in mind the common ground that every single one of us must share in the desire to realize that the broadest possible communication of ideas is in our own personal best interest. Thank you very much.